Cops have read it. What's the most bullshit sounding excuse you got that actually turned out to be true? Cop here got a call of a domestic dispute that sounded very heated and a lot of banging was heard. Get to scene and I can hear someone yelling and swearing and brawling. Doesn't sound good at all. Guy answers the door, shirt off and angry, but seems bewildered as to why police had been called. He told me he was building IKEA furniture. Sounds like the most bullshit thing. But we enter, see the new IKEA furniture half set up and no one else is home. Color me surprised. During a search of a person, I pulled out a bag of a sticky dark substance consistent with heroin. The subject had multiple drug priors and is a known heavy heroin user. He immediately tells me it is burnt sugar, and he is pissed someone sold it to him. Long story short, when I tested the substance, it did not test positive for heroin. I was driving with my fiancée and we went through a roadblock where they checked registration and shit, and we get to the cops and they ask for our registration. I'm sitting in the passenger seat, so I open up the glove box and right there is a clear, unmarked baggie filled to the brim with catnip. I completely forgot it was there and just froze. Wide-eyed, I turned to look at the cop shining his light through my open window and he's frozen too, just staring at the baggie with this look on his face like, "Really?" I just started immediately professing, "OMG, I swear to God this is catnip. You can take it and smell it or test it or whatever, like I swear." And at this point it's just so ridiculous that I start cracking up, and the cop takes it and reasonably deduces I'm telling the truth, and he starts laughing and calls his partner over and tells her what happened, and they both just cackled away for a minute and sent us on our way. I got pulled over for driving to school at 10 a.m. The cop wanted to know why I was skipping school. I explained that our little town's girls' basketball team just won state, and since the game was so far away they let us start that day at 10:30 a.m. He followed me all the way to the school so he could ask the principal. I still don't know what was illegal about driving to school at 10 a.m., but he was kind of a douche. Not a cop, but heard it said to one EMS. Go to a woman who has been attacked by her cat. Her injuries were crazy, covered in blood, her scalp is literally shredded, huge lacerations, etc. I know cats are known to do some damage, but the story wasn't fitting and she was so sketchy about anyone going in her house. Adamantly refuses to let anyone inside because she thinks they're going to take away her cat. He didn't mean to, he was just excited by the birds. Her cat was a lynx. My dad is an officer, and he pulled someone over for speeding and running a red light, and they said their breast implant burst. He called EMS to rush them to the hospital and turned out it did, and it's actually very dangerous if they leak. My dad was a cop and my favorite story of his goes like this. He's a young cop in a rough neighborhood. It's so late that the stoplights are flashing red, meaning treat it like a stop sign. Out of nowhere this pink caddy goes rolling through the intersection. My dad pulls him over. A big black dude was driving, the caddy had for interior, dice in the mirror. A real, pimp, car if you know what I mean. My dad goes, "Sir, do you know you ran that light back there?" And this guy says, "Officer, I do believe I got between the flashes." My dad was laughing so hard he had to let the guy go. Not a cop, but I had a run-in with one that was really funny once. When I was 18, I was on a double date with a friend, and we stepped out of a restaurant to smoke. A cop came up and started harassing us, telling us there had been break-ins into cars in the area. Eventually, he said he needed to pat us down, and he pulled a brown paper bag out of my friend's pocket. He got a smug look on his face and asked, "So, what's in here, huh?" My friend said, "The Emancipation Proclamation," with a completely straight face. The cop opened the bag, pulled out a small booklet, got embarrassed, and let us go. My friend had been to the Lincoln Museum earlier that day and did actually have a small copy of the Emancipation Proclamation in his pocket. Former cop here. I was behind a vehicle that couldn't stay in the lane, kept swerving, etc. It was 1 a.m., and I think another drunk idiot on the road. Pull him over, guy is a straight-up a-hole to me. Cursed me out, yelling at me, and I notice his speech is slurred. I get him out to car, and I can smell a fruity smell on his breath, and he has to lean against the car for support. I ask him how much he had to drink, and he tells me to fuck off. By this point I'm ready to bring him in for a DUI. But I just had a feeling something wasn't right. I called EMS to come check him. Blood sugar was at 40. Not drunk, just a diabetic. If I would have arrested him, He probably would have died before I finished the paperwork. Go with your gut if something doesn't seem right. This was my favorite story from my 4th grade teacher, not a cop. She went to a cousin's wedding in mid-July. The cousin had overestimated how much champagne they would need at the reception and was giving away bottles to anyone who was interested, so my teacher took 3 and put them in the back seat of her car. Again, this was a hot summer day in July. After saying their goodbyes, my teacher, her husband, and her parents piled into the car and pulled out onto the highway where 2 bottles burst open, spraying champagne everywhere and causing quite a ruckus. Of course, while this was happening, the car was swerving as the driver was also getting bathed in sparkling champagne. So it came as no surprise that as soon as they collected themselves, they saw the familiar flashing lights of a state trooper and pulled over. According to my teacher, the first thing the cop said was, "I'm not gonna ask if you've been drinking because I can smell it from here." My teacher tried explaining what had happened, but the cop wouldn't hear of it and ordered everyone out of the car. That's when the cop saw that everyone, both drivers and passengers, were dressed in their finery, but soaked with champagne, and looking quite shaken. A cursory search showed the open bottles, but the cops still insisted on a quick sobriety check just to make sure. My first ever real call was for a flasher at the local park. When I got there and finally found him, it was a mentally impaired young man 17 who had a pair of headphones on and a full Pooh Bear. I said, "Hey man, come here, what the hell is going on? You know you have to keep your pants on, especially at the park." He goes on to tell me he had bad itching down his pants and couldn't take it anymore, so he had to rip his pants off and was running home to get help. I said, "Come on, you couldn't make it home first?" He said no, I had ants in my pants. As sure as shit, according to more than one witness's account, he had been sitting in a sandbox playing at the park and accidentally on a nest of red ants that had crawled up his pant legs. Not a cop, but I did get stopped by one for eating a taco. I worked at a community college in LA that had a high school right next to it. Well, there was a lot of drugs sold through the fence at the high school, so there was always a cops driving up and down the street between the schools. Couldn't get a parking pass since I just worked at the school, so I always parked on that street. Hit up Taco Bell for lunch and was sitting in my car eating my double-decker tacos when a cop drove past. Next thing I know, he's flipping a U-turn and heading right for me. He slides to a stop driver window to driver window and yells at, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Stunned, I just said, "Eating my lunch." Well, he isn't buying it and says I'm hiding something. I just hold up my taco and looked so confused. He burst out laughing and peeled out. Saw him a few times after that, and he always waved and had the biggest grin on his face. Here's my best story. I had a heroin addict who I arrested for a warrant. While searching her purse, I found a small container with a grayish substance in it, consistent with heroin. When I asked her what it was, she started laughing. She told me to test it because it wasn't heroin. I tested it, and sure enough, the test came back negative. She explained to me that inside the container was the ashes of her dead cat. She said that when she goes to pick up heroin for her friends, she'll take some for herself and cut the rest with her cat's ashes. Her friends have been snorting or shooting up some of her dead cat. Was doing a tour as an MP, not my normal job, but whole other story, and we got called on a domestic. At the house, there is this huge corn-fed guy about 6 feet 4 inches and 275, and a petite Asian girl about 4 inch 10, and 95 pounds soaking wet. The whole house was in disarray, and the call had come because of yelling heard by the neighbors. She was crying and talking in an Asian language that none of us understood, and kept gesturing toward her huge husband. He wasn't talking. We wrap him up, take him to the station, and are trying to interview him, but he's not saying much. We intend to charge him with domestic assault. We notice somewhere along the way that he has horrible welts all along the backs of his hands and along his forearms. It took a lot of prying, but we finally got out of him that his wife would beat him with wire coat hangers when she was mad, and apparently that was pretty often. He was too embarrassed to admit to anybody that he was being abused by his wife, who was less than a third of his size. We finally got it straightened out, turned her over to the local police, and barred her from base. Hopefully the guy got the help he needed. Do you have a similar story? Leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.